Stay tuned, and later on in this video I'll show you how you can be a beekeeper without actually owning your own bees. I was just talking to a friend of mine last night on Facebook about baiting his yard to see what kind of bee activity he had in the area, because he wanted to set up some swarm traps. And this is a 5-gallon bucket of sugar syrup I had in the back of my truck that fell over and spilled in the back of my truck. I had to stop at the bank. It's the only reason I even noticed it. Looks like I must have dumped it at the corner up there. There's 5 gallons of sugar syrup in the back of my truck. I've been in the bank for about 15 minutes and there's already a dozen honeybees out here on my truck. And I'm kind of I'm in a business district right now. There's a KFC, there's the main highway. There is a good sized neighborhood back in there. I know most of the beekeepers in this area just from the association meetings and things like that. I don't know of any managed hives back there. Not to say there couldn't be, but these are probably in somebody's house somewhere. So in the short time I was in the bank, all these honeybees found my accidental spill. So I'm fixing to head back to my house, and I'm not going to hose this out. I'll just leave this. The bees will be all over my truck in a few minutes when I get back to the house. But what I'm leaving here at the bank is going to have a pretty good sized bee swarm at the bank here shortly. I'll have to retract my statement from earlier about not knowing if there's any hives in the area, because I just remembered that there's an older gentleman named George who lives in a neighborhood that wraps all around back here behind the bank. The bank's up here about a half mile. George he's not a member of a beekeepers club with us, but he has 6 hives that I know of, but he doesn't keep them at his house. He keeps them scattered out. So he may have a couple at his house, and that may have been where those bees came from. But as quick as they found my truck, I'd imagine they're closer than that. But my point from my conversation last night was just to put out some feeders and see what kind of activity you get in your area. See if it's worth putting out swarm traps. If you get no activity on a feeder, chances are there's not a colony near you. You may not have enough. You may be in a pine forest where there's really nothing for them to eat, and there's not going to be any colonies around you. If you start feeding and you see a bunch of activity, if they're from a managed hive, whoever owns the hives will appreciate you feeding their bees, because anything helps, especially coming into winter in the south. The bees fly a lot during the winter as opposed to the way they do up north. They don't really stay in the hive as much as they would up north, so they use up a lot of their winter stores pretty early on, just flying around looking for more food. And if it's not a managed hive, the bees will appreciate you feeding them anyway, and you'll know if you have activity worth trying to trap. So get your traps set up and get you some feeders set up and enjoy the company of the bees over the winter. You can almost be a beekeeper without having your own hives if you got them in your area. You can just feed them and just enjoy watching them come and go. I just pulled back up in my yard and dropped the tailgate, and I want to show you how quick these bees find this sugar syrup in my truck. I've got 2 hives there, one there, one around the corner there, and then I have 2 more hives about a quarter of a mile down the street at a Satsuma farm that way. And I pulled up in here less than a minute ago and dumped this ice chest out. I've already got at least 1 bee on here. I'll time this and see exactly how long it takes them to really go to work on this. It's looking like I have a swarm trap set up on my truck. They're exploring those holes in the bed right there. There's 3 bees in there now. Thank you for dining at Randy's Meals on Wheels. If you enjoyed your dining experience, please go and tell your friends. We're at the 20-minute mark. Word's starting to get out. I'll check back when there's more activity. This is a 25-minute mark of my midday feeding experiment. It was straight up 12 noon when I pulled in here, so it was lunchtime anyway. This is the 35-minute mark, and I poured out what sugar syrup was left in the bucket onto my tailgate. The hives are nice and active today, but even more so since I pulled up. I'm at the 45-minute mark. I don't know if you can see all the bees swarming around the back of my truck. This is still at the 45-minute mark. This hive is about 200 feet from my truck, and about half of them are going towards the truck, the other half are going the opposite direction. This is the 1 hour mark. It's straight up 1 o'clock now. I don't know if you can tell the level change in the syrup on the tailgate, but it's an overcast day and it's cool outside, so none of that went away due to evaporation. It was all taken back to the hive. When they're feeding like this, when they're done eating, they'll usually land somewhere off of where they're eating to groom themselves before going back to the hive. So you'll see them landing in the grass. They'll land on you, on whatever's close by to clean up before going home. This is the 1 hour and 15-minute mark, and they've about got the tailgate totally cleaned off. They're landing everywhere to clean up. 1 hour and 23 minutes, and the tailgate is dry. And because of all the junk I got in my truck, where syrup ran up under everything, they'll be working on my truck for a couple days probably. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to become a beekeeper without buying any bees or any equipment or spending any money to speak of. All you need is a milk jug, some medium-sized rocks to fill up the bottom of the milk jug, and any kind of small container. This is a dog treat container, but you could use a mayonnaise jug or a peanut butter jug or a ball jar. Anything will work. And the tools you'll need are a razor blade to cut the milk jug, and then either if you're using a container with a metal lid, you can use a nail to poke the holes. But if you're going to drill your holes in a plastic lid, I use a 1/16 bit, and so you need a bit and your drill. You don't want to try to poke holes in these lids with a nail, because it'll usually bust the lid down the middle, or the hole just won't be a clean enough hole to be useful to you. Now, like I say, I use a 1/16 drill bit. It's small enough that it'll help hold the liquid in, but it's big enough that the bees can stick their tongues up through the hole that you drill. You can go with a slightly bigger bit, but this is what I use. So all you want to do is just drill a dozen or so holes. All over the lid, no particular pattern. If the lid is this is a little bit of a textured surface. If it was a real slick surface lid, I might take some sandpaper or some steel wool and scratch it up so the bees can hang on to it better, because it is going to be hanging upside down. That's just to give something for their feet to grab onto. This is your setup with the rocks. Just the bottom part of a milk jug or a bowl or dog food dish, whatever you're going to use, and some medium-sized rocks. You don't want to use too small of a rock, because you want spaces big enough for the bees to get all the way to the bottom so that they can drink everything in there. If they can't get all the way to the bottom, then wasps that are smaller than them or ants or something else are going to get in there and get to what's left. So this by itself can be used as a feeder. So all you do is take this and fill it with sugar syrup to somewhere in here. You don't want to cover the rocks, because like I said, they'll drown each other. This is just domino granulated sugar dissolved in water. It has to be corn syrup or cane sugar. It can't be beet sugar. Screw your lid on. It's been drilled out. And when you turn this upside down, it'll drain until it pulls a vacuum, and at that point it'll totally quit dripping. So you can either set this up on some sticks so the bees can get underneath of it and drink out of that, or if you want a catch basin for anything that might drain, if your container is not holding a vacuum like it should, you can set it over in this one, and then whatever runs out, instead of falling soaking into the ground, will fall into your container here, and the bees will be able to get to it. Or you can do both. You can put that in there and put that there, and you got 2 feeders. If you see wasp on them, don't get discouraged. The wasp won't hurt anything, and they will not bother you when they're out feeding like this unless you bother them. It's incredibly rare to get stung by bumblebees or wasps or anything else when they're feeding like this. This one right here, I'm patting it on the head. It's more concerned with getting this feed than it is with me fooling with it. And so that's why I say you don't need a veil or a bee jacket or anything like that to do this. Just be sure and set it up away from your front door or away from any walking path where your family or visitors or anybody may be coming in, because once they do find it, they'll stay pretty busy on it. And a lot of people, although you may have 100 bees on this thing at one time, and it terrifies people, but they won't bother you. Okay, so there you have it. 2 very simple, very cheap, very effective methods for open feeding. Anything done outside the hive is called open feeding. So if you're feeding out in the wide open in any manner, it's called open feeding. There are inside the hive feeders, and that's why they differentiate like that. But so there you have 1 method, 2 methods, or combine the 2. And here on our yard, it takes almost no time for them to find it. It's 78 degrees outside and they're flying pretty good right now, so they find it pretty quick. But even in the winter time here, if it's in the 30s or 40s and they're barely flying, if I move the feeder even a couple 100 feet away, it might take them a day or 2 to find it, because there's just not enough of them out there to discover it. So if you're in a colder climate, don't get discouraged. Keep feeding. Chances are the wasp and the bumblebees will find it before the honeybees, and if that's what you're drawing in and you want to feed them, keep feeding them. Eventually the honeybees will show up if there's any in your area. So that's a cheap way to get started luring your bees in and seeing if you got it in the area that you might be able to trap in a swarm trap come springtime. So get your feeders ready, and I'll do a video on swarm traps before spring.